Good morning and welcome to STL History Live. Our presentation today is Made in the STL, and it's going to be delivered today by my friend Amanda Clark, but more about her in just a moment. I'm Tammy Goldman. I'm Director of Tourism and Group Sales here at the Missouri Historical Society, and today I'm your host and technical supervisor. So I'm hopefully here to ensure that the program runs smoothly. Due to the present situation, nearly all of our programming is virtual, which is why you're all here. However, the Missouri History Museum, Soldiers Memorial, and our library are open to visit Wednesday through Sunday. Because your safety is our top priority, we are controlling the capacity of the buildings, and we're restricting those to 10%, and we do require advance reservations. You can make your reservations for the time tickets through our website at mohistory.org. So we do hope that you come and visit us. We're again open Wednesday through Sunday. Before we move forward, I do want to express my thanks and gratitude to all of you in the audience that are members of the Missouri Historical Society. We can't do what we do without your support. If you're not a member and would like more information, please visit our website, mohistory.org/support, for information about how you can support all of us and our programs. And I will have information up about that during our program. And lastly, I want to express our appreciation for the Zoo Museum Tax District. Without the support of the ZMD, we could not do what we do as well. And that comes from tax contributions from all of you in the St. Louis City and County. So just a few details to mention about today's program. It is a 30-minute presentation that actually we are re-recording today because of some technical difficulties we found during the last program. So today is 30 minutes. Normally it's followed by a question and answer that obviously we won't be able to do today. So let's get to why you're here, and I promise you I will stop talking. Today's program, it was originally meant to be a bus tour, but I've asked Amanda to do kind of the impossible, to condense this into just a 30-minute glimpse into an aspect of what the longer bus tour program is about. So today you're not going to be looking outside of a bus window, but in your computer screen for this wonderful experience. But soon, very soon, we're going to be back doing what we normally do on a bus. However, Amanda will tell you about how you can experience some of these wonderful programs that she has developed by walking. She has some walking tours as well. So today, this program is presented by Amanda Clark. She is our community tours manager and the developer of the STL tour program. So Amanda, I'm going to let you take it away.
All right, thank you. Let's see. Take over this share. There we go. All right, here's our program, Made in the STL. Let me get it started. So as you can see there, as Tammy said, my name is Amanda Clark, and I am the manager for our STL tour program, and that is a whole list of virtual tours that looks very similar to this, but are longer and more interactive, and then walking tours, and eventually bus tours, and then, I don't know, someday airplane tours, I don't know, forget that, maybe someday. But for now, it's just walking and virtual and eventually bus. So the photos you see there are me hugging my favorite building in St. Louis, the Bissell Street Water Tower, and then there on the right, this is me getting to talk history to some families in Old North St. Louis. So today's tour is Made in STL, and it is she said, a condensed version. We also do this as a virtual tour as well, so it's a condensed version of that. I'm going to do kind of an overview of manufacturing history in St.Louis and why we came to be such a center for manufacturing and industry, and pull out some of the highlight stories for that. So there's no way, every single detail. I'm also not going to mention shoe manufacturing or beer production. I'm going to talk about all the other things that were made here that will be very surprising. So before we get started, we have to do the very basic St. Louis history stuff first. And that is that our village, the St. Louis was founded by the guy on the far left there, Pierre Laclede, in 1764, and it was co-founded by him and his stepson, Auguste Chouteau, that's there on this guy here, who was 14 when they founded the village. And when they arrived here, not only was there several native tribes in the area, or populations in the area, but there was also the fact that the land was owned by Spain. And that was an issue. But the village grew, and this image here is the village by around the turn of the century. And so we have our fort out here. This would be about where Broadway is now, close to the St. Louis courthouse, the old courthouse building. So that's in the 1700s. In the 1800s, the city grows pretty quickly. We become the manufacturing center that we're going to discuss on today's tour. My PowerPoint keeps wanting to get away from me. And so this is the riverfront at the end of at the turn of the century, and you can see that the city is pushed right up to the river, and the city itself is orientated to the river. You see lots of warehouses and factories and smoke as the city grew into a modern city that it is now. And at the turn of the century, we were the 5th-ish largest city in the United States. And so we have the 1904 World's Fair, and the world comes to St. Louis to see all the things that we have done in this beautiful city that we've grown. And also we use it as a backdrop to do the World's Fair and all of that magnificence. And so that's a big deal to those of us in St. Louis that the World's Fair happened. And then the next thing that happened was the arch. The arch gets built. So you have the World's Fair, and then you have the arch, and that's kind of the big deals in St. Louis history. There's a whole bunch of stuff in the meantime. And so in the meantime, we have things, you know, Dred and Harriet Scott case, one of the biggest freedom cases brought by enslaved people that was a precursor to the Civil War. We become a rail hub and a center for not just trains crisscrossing the country and moving things around, but also a place where the actual rails that the trains are going to be riding on are happening or are produced. We have, you know, into the turn of the century, we have a big suffrage history here, and a great place to learn about how, you know, when women get the right to vote. We have got a little snippet here of a program from the Fox Theater, so one of the nation's grandest theaters. We are and are still a center for culture in the United States. And then we have our suburbs that start to grow in the early 20th century as the city of St. Louis grows and gets bigger and bigger. People start to push west, and a whole network of suburbs and communities grow up outside of it. And we are also a major transit city. Into the 1960s, we are served with a pretty robust streetcar and bus and transit system. So that's one of the things that help us grow into a modern city. And we also have some complicated pieces of our history. And we have Pruitt-Igoe, which was a federal housing project that was built in the 1950s, demolished in the 1970s, and is one of the big stories in St. Louis history when it comes to civil rights and it comes to segregation and housing history and all of that. So just kind of a big, you know, big picture view of some of the things that moved St. Louis in the 20th century. So I want to start now with why, you know, the quick story of industry in St. Louis. So first there was the fur trade. Right, that's what gets the whole thing started. Then we start making stuff for people that are heading west as the country grows. We make stuff for people for them to ride on, right? We're making wagons, and then later the rails for the trains to leave on. We are making things we start moving people and their things as we're shipping things and putting things on trains. Then we start making stuff for the world, and we are making airplanes and space capsules and crackers. We were a world leader in cracker manufacturing, and pecans, also a world leader in the act of, you know, shelling a pecan and nuts and sending those out and distributing them. Mattress springs, we were also a world leader in mattress springs production. And then there's Tums, which is, you know, there's a Tums manufacturing facility in downtown St. Louis where 99.9% of all Tums are made. A very random factory. In fact, a little random fact that people, it's always really surprising to me when I think about such a ubiquitous product that's made, you know, right in downtown St. Louis. I use the image here of the guy pointing at an image of the Ozarks to get started with what talking about the basics of industry in St. Louis history. So in 1900, we're the 4th largest city, right? And so 4th-ish, 5th-ish, right up there with Chicago and New York City and Philadelphia. And while we're nowhere near that anymore, we are still around 4th-ish or 5th-ish at a lot of things. Like we're the 3rd-ish largest railroad hub and one of the largest inland ports. And we still have a lot of big companies here that people have heard of, like MasterCard and Square and Enterprise. And we also have a company, a design firm here that designs some of the world's best roller coasters. So we've got a huge random amount of stuff here still happening in St. Louis. But I want to go back to why here. Why did the city grow up here and get to be so big at the turn of the century during the industrial age? First, there's rocks. So it seems like the easy answer is the river, right? You're going to ship things all over the country. But really it starts with rocks. And that's the fact that these super old Ozarks, which are the oldest mountain range in the country, the super old Ozarks, they bump up against the less super old Paleozoic rocks where St. Louis sits. And when that happens, you have lots of cool metals. And so you have lead and iron and zinc and nickel and all those things that come up out of the ground. And then we have the people that move here throughout the 19th century. They come from all over the world and they know what to do with those things that are mined out of the ground. And so then you have the things, so you've got the people and you've got the stuff. And then you go across the river into the Illinois basin and you have the fossil fuels that can fuel the production and can fuel the manufacturing. And then what do you have underneath our feet? We've got clay and things and limestone in which to build magnificent buildings. So all those things come together and a river to make this a really great manufacturing center. It's a good little overview there. So I'm going to take us on a little bit of a flyover real quick. Oh, nope, we're not going to fly there. So we're downtown St. Louis, and we're going to fly south into one of my favorite places, Carondelet, real quick. And so this is one of the very first early manufacturer centers for industry. Carondelet was founded around the same time as St. Louis, but one of its first major industries was lead. This is lead refining right along the rivers. They brought things in from rural Missouri, were brought here and refined there. And here's an image of Carondelet in the 1850s. And it looks kind of pastoral there, but then by the end of the 1800s was a major manufacturing center. And I've got the Vulcan Iron Works here, which got started in the very early 19th century and is now sitting as a vacant industrial lot because of the amount of work that it took in the early 20th century to clean up the site. Millions of tons of industrial waste had to be cleaned, and natural resources and things cleaned, and water. So the Vulcan Iron Works was right alongside the river in Carondelet, and it was a major employer. So then I'm going to go hop over to the rivers. The rivers, fed the city as well. And the first steamboat arrived here in 1817, the Zebulon Pike. Eventually, by the middle of the century, there were over 600 steamboats somewhere on the Mississippi River during the day, going up and down, and there would have been several dozen docked here each night. But one of the things that slows St. Louis's growth down is the lack of a railroad bridge. As the 19th century really gets going, we are still dependent on ferries to move materials across the Mississippi River, and then to get on a different train and head out. And one of the things that caused that to happen were the ferry companies held a really tight control here. And we're not really big fans of a bridge getting built. So that you see that receipt there for the Wiggins Ferry Company and the Wiggins Ferry, one of their ferries in that photograph on the lower right. Okay, our next little fly is going to go to a place that's pretty familiar to a lot of people that live in St. Louis, at least by name. I'm going to go to Dogtown. And by Dogtown, that really encompasses about 5 different communities. So I'm looking at, just to orientate you, you've got Washington University, Forest Park, and then just to the south is an area known familiarly as Dogtown, but really it's a couple of different places. Originally, that would have been known as Cheltenham. And Cheltenham was or this particular area was known as a mining community. And here's a map of mines in Cheltenham at the turn of the century. And so if you look at these are coal mines and clay mines, and then all along what is now Manchester Road, which is a major artery throughout St. Louis, there would have been facilities for manufacturing bricks and piping and different things like that. And then you have Forest Park up here. I just want to point out there are mines noted on this map in Forest Park as well. So there are mines all throughout the city of St. Louis. At the turn of into the 20th century, there were over 100 coal or clay mines throughout the city. And this is a fun image I found in our archives of a ice and coal dealer, and this image would have been taken down in Carondelet. Just a neat little snapshot of life and how those things were distributed and shared. And the next image I have is, this is back going to Cheltenham, and this is Laclede sewer pipe and fire brickwork. So she's like a working image of those mines, and what this would have been in Dogtown or Cheltenham, whatever you want to call it now. But that Dogtown area, this would have been just part of the landscape there where mines like this where men worked. This is the Christie Fire Clay Products. This is at Kings Highway and Chippewa Street in St. Louis. And so now in St. Louis City, that intersection is a major intersection with grocery stores and apartment buildings and cars coming and going. There's like Starbucks there, but this would have been Christie Fire Clay Products at the turn of the century. So this is one of the largest of the brick manufacturers in St. Louis. And here's just an image of some of that beautiful brick that we have throughout our city. A fun little connection to the brick industry in St. Louis, which is one of my favorite areas of research, but fun little connection is the most recent Busch Stadium has that red brick veneer to it, which is a nod to our red brick architecture found throughout the city. This is an image from the Missouri Historical Society archives of a building being built in downtown St. Louis before the turn of the century. And I just found it to be a fascinating image to kind of dig around with and look at closely at how a construction site would have worked as these buildings were being built. And you see the stone foundation being put together there. You see mules pulling carts, and it just looks like a totally different scene than our construction sites today would have needed, ramps and things to get animals down into them, and just all the different building materials that they needed there. And it also is a nice image to kind of harken into the waves of people that built our city and worked in manufacturing. The earliest populations would have been, we did have a sizable enslaved population when the city first started going, and that meant both native peoples and Africans, enslaved Africans. In the 19th century, we have waves of immigration from Europe and all over the world. Big waves of Germans and Irish and Italians and Polish and people from all over that come and have different skills and bring different things that they can build and do and add to it. And then you have the Great Migration, which is the big movement of African Americans from the South to the North after the Civil War in the early 20th century. So all those things, all those people were coming and doing this work here. Okay, so now we're going to do one more little flyover. Let's see, where are we going this time? So we're going to leave Forest Park. I'm going to get a view of the whole area, all of St. Louis. Let's scroll in. Busch Stadium, downtown, and I'm going to orientate you and talk about a surprise. This area here, this is Keener Plaza and Busch Stadium. We have Keener Plaza here, Busch Stadium, the old courthouse is sitting right here, just to kind of show you where we are downtown. And what I'm going to talk about is how that area, and this could be an hours long presentation, I'm going to try to condense it very quickly, but in the mid-19th century, this area, this part of St. Louis grows to be what was St. Louis's Chinatown. And so this would have been starting in the 1860s. You have a small community of Chinese immigrants that begin to settle there. Soon that becomes a more distinct district that is bound by 7th and 9th Street and Chestnut and Walnut. And it was known as Hop Alley. So, and there are several different suggestions, just the root of that name. Could have been opium dens that were associated with the area. Something interesting about studying the newspaper accounts of life in this area, they really focus on the crime. However, when you really dig into it, the crime is not happening with the residents, but the people that are going to these businesses and having the opium dens and seeing this as kind of a vice district. And so it's an interesting dive into St. Louis history as to how they treated coverage of this area. And so I've got this image here of the this is a newspaper clipping from the 19th century about the death of a prominent Chinese citizen, and it uses words, you know, like the great funeral and celestials, and they really play up the religious beliefs and traditions of the community and kind of give it this mystical spin and this, you know, kind of mystery. And you can find all of this in digging through the Post-Dispatch archives and different newspapers. It's really an interesting snapshot into St. Louis history. And these photographs taken 1950s and 60s, you see the Asia Cafe, which was a popular place, and then this little truck here. But I wanted to show, my favorite part of this image is this right here, which is the arch being built in the background. Just going to show you how close that was to more modern St. Louis. In the 1970s, there was one of the last of the Chinese laundries, which was the main industry for Chinese citizens in St. Louis. One of the last laundries was open, and it was set to be closed, and the city had this preservationist, and people kind of rallied behind these two brothers that owned the Samoa Laundry, these two brothers that had come here from China, and they had spent their entire lives, adult lives, working in their laundry. And it was set for demolition, and citizens were able to fight it and keep it, and they were open into the 1980s. It's a well-known business. Okay, now we're going to fly to north of downtown St. Louis into one of my very, very favorite spots to visit today, and one of my favorite spots to visit when digging through the 1875 Compton and Dry map, which is the best place to get lost in the world, is in this map. And it is a map that was drawn again in 1875 of every detail possible of the entire city of St. Louis. And so of this one though, I find it very stark to kind of, if you were to go there now, and again, this is just north of downtown, this is a pretty desolate area, not a lot of businesses just right there anymore, but this shows that it's into the 19th century, just how dense it was. And the thing I'm going to focus on quickly is the Belcher Sugar Refinery. So we're going to zoom in on that guy right there. And Belcher is this here, and this building complex was there until about 2000. In 2001, there was a big fire for the complex, and we lost most of these buildings. Just to the north is the St. Louis shot tower. So this is where lead was pumped up to the top and dropped, and would make little bullets and shot for shotguns. So, and that was one of the largest ones in the country. So we're going to focus on the Belcher Sugar Refinery, and it was the nation's largest sugar refinery by the 1870s. It was founded in 1840. It employed about 600 people, making it one of the city's largest employers. It was importing raw sugar from New Orleans, Cuba, and the Manila Islands. So think of that time period in plantation work and just the change in labor and the things that are happening, and all that sugar is coming to St. Louis. And they're dominating not just dominating the industry, but also physical space. And the wharf there was, dominated by ships bringing sugar to them. And it would have been a major employer for people living in North St. Louis. However, it bleeds interesting into the 20th century in this way. And this is that Belcher Sugar Refinery eventually knew that they needed better water than the Mississippi River. They were in search of better water than the Mississippi River water for their refining process. So they build a 2,200, or they dig a 2,200 foot well between 1849 and 1854. And this amazing map on the one on the left there shows what they used and how deep they had to go and what they had to make it through. When they got to the bottom, they found water, but it was not suitable for the refining. But it was suitable as kind of medicinal, artisanal water that people like to drink and think that it made them healthier. So they offered it to the public in a big fountain first that was there. And then eventually they piped it over to what was known as the Belcher Hotel in downtown St. Louis. There was also a bathhouse that was on this site that used that water as well. And I'm gonna kind of zoom in down O'Fallon Street to show you the bathhouse. It's still there now. It's the home of the William Kerr Foundation. Just kind of show you, we're gonna go down all the way to the end of O'Fallon Street, the Clede Power Building, and back up a little bit to see the bathhouse that would have been connected to the, this is where that sugar refinery sat that was in that map that we looked at. And there's the bathhouse. Okay, and then, but I mentioned that hotel. So this is the Belcher Hotel that went in, the Belcher Hotel in the late, in the early 20th century, and it was a spa, and you see people doing the aerobics and having a spa day. And this is actually sitting where the Hampton Inn is along Broadway, just north of the Mansion House Hotel and Apartments. All right, well, that is the end of my tour, and that's kind of covered some short things very quickly, a few highlights of St. Louis manufacturing history. There's so much more to do, and on our virtual tour we go into labor, some labor history, and some manufacturing of some fun images, some surprising fun images of things that were made here, such as the fact that St. Louis was a world leader in paper kite manufacturing into the 20th century. It's often a big surprise. So Tammy, if you want to take it back.
Thank you so much, Amanda. I always learn something new, even if I've actually even seen this presentation before. There's still new tidbits to pick up. So thank you so much for providing this tour. And know that we have STL History Live programs every Tuesday at 11 a.m. And please visit us often, either at one of our buildings, the Missouri History Museum, Soldiers Memorial, or our library, or tune into our many virtual programs. Thank you, and we will see you soon.